I always knew my mother-in-law didn't like me, but I never thought she'd go this far. The morning of the most important job interview of my life, I walked into the kitchen and found her already up, smiling sweetly, stirring a fresh cup of coffee just for me. At first, I thought nothing of it, but then I saw something fall from her hand, a small packet, a flash of white powder, and her fingers trembling just slightly as she stirred again. My chest tightened, my mind raced. Was I being paranoid, or was she actually trying to sabotage me? I was already late. I couldn't cause a scene. So instead, I made one quick move. And what happened next? Let's just say, she ended up drinking her own trap. This is the story of how I turned my mother-in-law's secret plan against her, without ever raising my voice, and how that one cup of coffee changed everything. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Leave a comment and subscribe for more true stories of betrayal and payback. I'm David Reynolds, I'm 34, a software developer. And until recently, I thought the biggest challenge in my life was just finding another job after the last round of layoffs. My wife Melissa and I live in Seattle. She's a dental hygienist, kind, dependable, always trying to keep the peace. We've been married for 6 years, and most of the time, it's good. Except for one thing. Her mother, Eleanor, from day one, she made it clear I wasn't the kind of man she wanted for her daughter. Too quiet, too modest, not successful enough, not rich enough. She'd smile in public, then twist the knife in private. "Are you sure he's the best you could do, honey? Back when you were dating Scott, things looked so promising." Scott, the ex-boyfriend, the real estate guy with the Benz, the yacht, the $1,000 smile. He and Eleanor never really broke up, at least not emotionally. I was just the filler, the downgrade. But Melissa chose me, and Eleanor never forgave her for that. It started small. Little digs, gift cards accidentally sent to Scott's office, family photos where I was mysteriously cropped out. I told myself it didn't matter, that as long as Melissa and I were solid, Eleanor could stew in her judgments. But over the past year, she'd gotten bolder. One time she lost the tailor receipt for my only formal suit, right before an interview. Another time, she offered to help clean, and somehow spilled wine all over my portfolio. Melissa always tried to smooth things over. She doesn't mean it. She's just protective. And I tried to believe her, but I was running out of patience. Then came the big opportunity, a senior back-end developer role at a top fintech firm. Remote first, high salary, great benefits. A role that could finally give us the stability we needed. When I made it to the final round, Melissa insisted we spend the night before at her mother's house. Less traffic, no distractions, she said. Eleanor, of course, played the doting hostess. I didn't sleep well that night. Something about the way she smiled at dinner, the questions she asked. "So, David, what will you wear tomorrow? That old navy blazer again? I hope you don't freeze up this time. You do tend to ramble, don't you?" I kept quiet, bit my tongue, tried to breathe through the irritation. The morning came, I got up early, went downstairs, and there she was, already awake, perfect hair, full face of makeup, and a steaming mug waiting for me on the counter. "Thought you could use this," she said, sliding the coffee toward me. She smiled that smile, tight, polite, a little too wide. I reached for the cup, and then I saw it. A faint residue around the rim, and something even more troubling. A tiny folded packet in her hand, which she tried to slide into her pocket as she turned away. I froze. My stomach dropped. Was I seeing what I thought I was seeing? In that instant, everything she'd ever done, every whisper, every insult, every accident came flooding back. And I knew. She wasn't just meddling anymore. She was trying to take me out of the picture, but what she didn't know was that I was done playing nice. I stood there, staring at that cup, steam rising like a silent warning. Eleanor's back was turned now. She was rinsing a spoon at the sink, humming something cheerful. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just paranoia. This was real. She'd tried to drug me, sabotage me, and worst of all, she did it with a smile. I had two choices: call her out, or keep my head. Calling her out would start a war. Melissa was upstairs, still getting dressed. If I blew this open right now, it would explode the entire morning, and I'd probably miss my interview. But I wasn't about to drink whatever she put in that cup. So I made my move. I scanned the counter. There was another mug, empty but still warm from the dishwasher. I casually picked it up, pretending I needed a second cup for the road. But when Eleanor turned to grab a dish towel, I swapped them, clean and fast. The sedated coffee slid in front of her spot. My hand didn't even shake. I rinsed the rim of the clean mug, filled it with black coffee straight from the pot, and took a sip right in front of her, just to sell it. She smiled again. Satisfied, the trap was set. But for her. I grabbed my bag, threw on my blazer, and called upstairs. "Babe, I'm heading out. Love you," Melissa shouted back. "Good luck. Call me when it's over." Then Eleanor chimed in. "Oh, don't forget your coffee." I turned to her, nodded once, and left, without touching her cup. I didn't look back, not even once. In the car, my hand started shaking, adrenaline crash. What the hell just happened? Part of me still wondered, what if I'd misread it? What if it was nothing? But then I remembered that packet in her hand, the smirk on her face, the way she always found new ways to trip me up, just when I started doing well. I drove in silence, letting the tension bleed out with every turn of the wheel. By the time I reached the office, my mind was clearer, focused, sharp. I walked into the building, checked in with reception, and waited. A few other candidates sat across from me. Suits, resumes, jittery smiles. But me? I felt strangely calm, because I knew I'd already passed the hardest test of the day. Meanwhile, back at Eleanor's house, Melissa told me later how it unfolded. Around 10 minutes after I left, her mother started acting off, slurring words, clumsy, falling asleep mid-sentence. She tried to laugh it off, said she didn't sleep well. But then she knocked over a bowl of fruit, nearly face-planted into the couch. Melissa got worried and called a nurse hotline. They told her it sounded like side effects of a sedative. She didn't even connect the dots at first, thought maybe her mom had taken something by accident, or forgot to mention a new medication. By the time I called her, half an hour later, I had no idea any of that was happening. All I knew was, my interview went great. I nailed the technical questions, handled the behavioral scenarios like a pro, and when they asked about stress management, let's just say I had more real-world experience than they realized. I hung up the call, took a breath, and let myself smile. Just a little. I thought the worst was over, but that cup of coffee, it wasn't done brewing trouble yet. By the time I got home that afternoon, the air felt different. Melissa was waiting at the door, arms crossed, eyes full of questions. "She's asleep," she said quietly. "Something's not right." Eleanor was slumped on the couch, out cold, snoring softly, lips dry, a teacup resting crookedly in her lap. I asked Melissa what happened. She said, "Right after you left, she started fading, slurring, nodding off. I thought maybe low blood sugar, but she didn't eat anything strange." That's when I knew there was no doubt left. It hadn't been a bluff. She'd actually gone through with it, and she drank it herself. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't also been terrifying. Melissa was already Googling symptoms, pacing in the kitchen. I told her to stop, to let her sleep it off. And when she asked why I wasn't more worried, I lied. Or I only gave her half the truth. She probably took the wrong meds. Maybe she's more stressed than she lets on. Melissa nodded hesitantly, but I could tell she didn't fully buy it. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because I was scared, but because I had a choice to make. Do I let this go, act like nothing happened, or do I finally confront it, bring it into the light, once and for all? I needed proof, something beyond a gut feeling. The next morning, I found the cup she'd been drinking from still on the counter, half full, same faint residue clinging to the rim. I put it in a sealed plastic bag and dropped it off at a private lab on my way to grab groceries. Told them it might have been tampered with. Didn't give my name. Didn't need to. They told me results would take 72 hours. Those 3 days felt longer than the last 3 years. I kept my distance from Eleanor. She rested a lot in her room, claimed it was the flu, didn't ask about my interview, didn't even fake a smile. Melissa grew more confused by the day. "Something's not right," she kept saying. "She's never like this." On the third day, I got the call. The voice on the other end was calm, clinical. There was a detectable amount of benzodiazepine in the sample. a sedative, common in anti-anxiety medications, very potent, especially on an empty stomach. My hands tightened around the phone. Not because I was surprised, but because now I had confirmation. I had leverage, and I was done hiding behind politeness. That evening I asked Melissa to run an errand, pick up dinner. Then I walked into the guest room where Eleanor was reading some glossy magazine. She looked up, surprised. "Napping again, David?" I closed the door behind me. "Let's talk." I told her everything. What I saw, what I suspected, what the lab confirmed. She didn't deny it. Not at first. She just stared at me, lips tight, fingers clutching the pages like they could save her. And then she laughed, dry, bitter. "No one would have believed you," she whispered. "You're just the placeholder. You were never supposed to last." I didn't blink, didn't flinch. "You tried to drug me before a life-changing interview, and you ended up drugging yourself." Her face paled. The reality settled in. "You could go to jail for this," I said flatly. "But I'm not pressing charges. Yet." She tried to speak. I raised a hand. "But from now on, there are going to be rules." Yes, this wasn't just a turning point. It was the point of no return. Because once you see what someone's truly capable of, you can never unsee it. That night, I wrote down everything. Not for revenge, not yet. But because if I didn't document it, every detail, every word, every glance, I'd start doubting myself again. And I couldn't afford that anymore. I backed up the lab results, saved the voicemail from the technician, even took photos of the mug and the residue around the rim in case she tried to dispose of it. This time, I was going to be ready. The next morning, I sat down with Melissa. She was still confused, still trying to hold both truths in her heart, that her mother loved her, and that her mother had tried to destroy me. "I need you to hear something," I said. Then I played the recording. Our conversation, her mother's words, sharp and bitter and undeniable. Melissa didn't speak at first. She just sat there, one hand covering her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't want to believe it," she whispered. "I thought maybe you misread her. Maybe she was just overprotective." I nodded slowly. "I know, I wanted to believe that too. But she crossed a line, Melissa, and I won't let it happen again." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and nodded. "What do we do?" she asked. And so, we made a plan. First, boundaries. Eleanor would no longer stay at our home uninvited. No unannounced visits, no keys, no secrets. Second, accountability. Melissa would confront her directly, not with anger, but with clarity. Third, protection. We'd keep all evidence safe, just in case she tried to twist the story or retaliate. That afternoon, Melissa called her mother into the living room. I stayed silent. This wasn't mine to lead. It had to come from her. "Mom," Melissa said, "I know what you did." Eleanor froze. "You drugged my husband, and if he hadn't switched those cups, you'd have gotten away with it." For the first time, I saw Eleanor shaken, not smug, not sarcastic, just stunned. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, voice barely audible. "I thought if he failed, you'd finally leave him." Melissa's voice cracked. "Fail? He's done nothing but love me, work for us, respect this family, while you've chipped away at him for years." Silence. A long, bitter pause. And then Melissa said something I didn't expect. "If you ever do anything like this again, you will never see me, or your future grandchild." That hit her like a slap. Melissa didn't know yet that she was pregnant. But I did. We'd just found out a few days ago, too early to tell anyone. I hadn't even had a chance to share the news. And hearing her say those words, without knowing the full weight behind them, that told me everything I needed to know. She was on my side now. For real. Eleanor didn't apologize. Not really. She just nodded stiffly and left the room. We didn't hear from her for 3 weeks. And honestly, they were the calmest weeks of our marriage. No passive-aggressive texts, no surprise drop-ins, just peace. I got the job offer a few days later. High salary, full remote. A team that respected me. And for once, I walked into a new chapter without feeling like someone was waiting to trip me. Melissa and I started going to counseling, not because we were broken, but because we were finally ready to rebuild without outside interference. One night, as we were sitting on the couch, she turned to me and said, "I see it now, all of it, and I'm sorry it took me so long." I wrapped my arm around her. "You saw it when it mattered most. We didn't need to destroy Eleanor. We just needed to remove her power. And sometimes, that's the most effective kind of revenge. 3 weeks of silence. That's how long it lasted. No calls, no texts, not even a forwarded recipe link or some backhanded meme about real men with six-figure jobs. It was peaceful and weirdly quiet. Melissa and I started settling into a rhythm again. Late-night talks, meal planning, the kind of small domestic things that feel bigger when the tension lifts. I started the new job remotely, working from a tidy little setup we carved out in the guest room. The same room Eleanor had once claimed as her own. I took down her frame photo, hung a whiteboard in its place. But of course, that kind of quiet never lasts forever. Eleanor reached out in week 4, not with an apology, but with a carefully worded message. "I hope you're well. I've been reflecting. I understand I crossed a line. Perhaps one day we can talk, just the 3 of us." First, she didn't say the word sorry, not even once. Melissa showed me the text. Her hands were steady, her voice even. "She wants a meeting," she said. "What do you want to do?" We agreed to meet at a cafe in the open, neutral ground, no homes, no closed doors. Eleanor arrived in pearls, hair curled, smile mechanical. She ordered chamomile tea. Didn't touch it. Melissa opened the conversation. "We came here for one reason. We need to be clear about what will and won't happen moving forward." Eleanor blinked, startled by her daughter's tone. I sat quietly beside her, watching. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because this wasn't about winning an argument anymore. It was about enforcing consequences. Melissa continued, "You don't get to be part of our lives until you acknowledge what you did. And I don't mean half apologies or blaming it on stress." Silence. Then Eleanor's voice cracked, ever so slightly. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I was trying to protect you from making a mistake you'd regret." Melissa leaned forward. "My only regret is not seeing what you were doing sooner. You don't get to decide who's worthy of me. I do." That was it, the final shift. The power was gone. Eleanor looked down, fiddled with her spoon, and whispered, "Then I suppose I need to step back." I nodded once. "That's all we've ever wanted." We stood up to leave. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time in 6 years, I saw something different in her face. Not hatred, not disdain, but fear. Because she realized she couldn't control this anymore. She had lost. And not because I shouted, not because I humiliated her, but because I outmaneuvered her. That was the final blow. In the weeks that followed, she kept her distance. Melissa maintained polite but minimal contact. She'd send a check-in text every few days. We'd respond with one-word answers. Boundaries, they held. And the best part? The peace that followed wasn't fragile anymore. It was real. We painted the guest room. Melissa finally took the pregnancy test she'd been putting off. Positive. When I heard the news, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, blinking in disbelief, and then I laughed. All the bitterness, all the games, all the drama. And now, we were about to bring a life into the world, on our terms, free, untouched, uncontrolled. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about payback. It's about protection, and walking away knowing you didn't stoop to their level. You rose above it, and still won. 6 months later, things are quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet, not the waiting for the next blow kind, just peaceful. I'm thriving at my new job. Remote work gave me back hours I didn't know I'd lost. Time I now spend with Melissa and planning for something new. Our daughter is due in February. We already picked out her name. And no, we didn't tell Eleanor, not yet. We're not cutting her off forever. But there are rules now, boundaries she doesn't get to rewrite. Melissa still talks to her. Briefly, a holiday call, a birthday check-in, but gone are the days of open doors and unchecked influence. We chose to raise our child in truth, not manipulation, not guilt, not control disguised as concern. And looking back, I realized the old me wouldn't have handled it this way. I would have snapped, or worse, stayed silent. But that morning, standing in that kitchen, holding that poison cup, something in me shifted. I learned that silence doesn't always equal peace. That politeness can be a prison, and that sometimes the smartest move is to let your enemy trip on their own trap. I didn't ruin Eleanor. She did that herself. All I did was step aside and let the truth hit her full in the face. And now, Melissa sees it. She knows where loyalty belongs, not in bloodlines, but in truth. We're stronger now, more honest, and ready to build something better, without permission, without fear. So, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room, if you've ever been told to just keep the peace, let me tell you something. Sometimes keeping the peace means letting go of the war inside your own home. Would you have done the same if you were in my shoes? Comment below. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe. For more stories of betrayal, justice, and the quiet kind of revenge that speaks loudest.